Hi everybody, it's John of JWH Millinery and welcome back to my channel. And in this video we are going to be making this hat. So if you want to see how I made this, keep on watching. If this is the first time you've come across my videos, hi, I'm John, nice to have you. And to all my regular viewers, welcome back. And everybody just make sure you hit subscribe down below. I'm not sure if it's here or if it's here, but it's one of these somewhere. Make sure you drop a comment or a like or something like that, just to just to give this boy a heads up, no pun intended. So the first thing I did to make this hat was I used some black buckram from Be Unique. The block that I'm using to do the sides of the crown is the MBB from Guy Moss Brown, and to do the tip of the crown I went ahead and used my MB2 bowler tip, also from Guy Moss Brown. These two are in a multi-block set on Guy Moss Brown, which I will link in the description box below. And I just find that because these match in terms of the tip, for example, matches the top of the crown. I use, if I'm doing a pillbox style in buckram, I will tend to use this way of making that, just so then I know my tip is the correct shape, the correct size to fit on the inside of the crown. This is then left to dry and just quickly stitched together because we are going to be covering it in the later on anyway. So once it's dry, take it off the block and just stitch them together to get your crown shape. Next, I went ahead and blocked my brim. So I'm using the dusky pink budget Sinamay from Petersham's Millinery Supplies, and the block that I'm using is the FHBS01 Saucer hat block from Hat Blocks Direct. One thing I like about this block, it has that string groove, so it does help when you have blocked your shape 80% of the time. Put your string in and then you can then go ahead and pull that down even more to get a really nice, crisp, smooth shape. I went ahead and I stiffened this with some stiffener from Taub and Rena and left this dry overnight, and then once that was dried, I took it off, trimmed it down, and I wired the edge with some sprung wire, or spring wire. I call it spring wire, but I think it's called spring wire. What I also did was I joined my edges with a ferrule as well, just making sure I cut my spring wire or sprung wire maybe about ½ a centimetre to a centimetre larger than the actual circumference of the brim, so it just makes that edge of it just nice and taut, so then it keeps that shape. So by now you will have your brim, which has been wired, and you'll have your crown, which has been sewn together. And because we're covering the sides in feathers, we're not going to be covering the top, so we need to cover that with some fabric. So I have this beautiful, I'm not too sure what type of fabric it is, but it's a nice purple, and I just backed this with some interfacing and stitched it into place just to cover the tip of the crown. Because we're covering the sides with feathers, I wasn't too worried about my placement of stitches. However, just small stitches will be fine to hold this into place. So I've put the brim back onto the saucer block, and taking the MBB base that I used to block the sides of the crown, I placed that on top of the brim in the position where I want my crown to sit. Now I wanted to make this off center, slightly off center, and leaning a bit more to the back. So I kind of wanted like an off side, like I didn't want it to be perfect. I wanted it to look a little odd because, that's kind of how I roll. I don't think I quite succeeded in that too much, looking off center, but it definitely sits quite far towards the back, slightly like a cap style. What I then did was I drew round the crown onto the brim so I could see where that's going to sit. Then I cut into the brim, leaving around about an inch or just under an inch away from that line, and then cut it into the towards the line, so then when we can fold it up so we've got something that we can attach it to the crown. At this point you will have your crown and you will have your brim. I basically just stitched these together using some large stitches, as you can see, just to hold it into place. And then I went around with my feathers. These feathers were pre-trimmed, by the way, so I took away any of the fluffy parts of the feather. I just used some small like embroidery scissors just to cut them off. And what this would, I mean, you can save them. I've saved all mine, but this means that you don't have that fluffiness. I just want like that nice sharpness of the feather. And using some tacky glue, I'm just putting some dots onto the feather and pressing them in just so the glue hits that crown. I mean, we're going to be covering majority of this with ribbon and some painted feathers later on, but I still wanted a nice base to work with, so it doesn't really matter too much about whether or not you can see your glue at this point, because we are going to be covering it up. Okay, now you don't necessarily have to do this. I just wanted to try and make a traditional hat, traditional for me at least anyway, but still have an element of what I do and a bit more glitz and glam. So I did use some paints to sort of like just give a little bit of extra detail to the feathers. So the two paints I use is a Lumiere Halo Gold and Pearlescent Turquoise. And initially when I got these, I thought it would be more purple in the Halo Gold. It actually turned out to be quite gold. So, but it still works. It still works, but it wasn't. It was more gold than I expected it to be. I probably should have tested this first. And then I just went ahead and I painted enough feathers just to do one. Well, I actually painted enough feathers to do 2 layers around the crown. And as you can see later on, I decided to go with 1. But yeah, I painted these and then I just left these to dry overnight again. Just then the paint wouldn't transfer onto anything when we're using them. So at this point the paint has now dried, and as you can see here, I did do 2 layers. I wanted like the stripe running up and down, but there was just something about it. It didn't look what I was expecting, so I had to readjust what I was going to do with this. I ended up just taking the bottom layer of feathers off and actually covering the feathers that were in place already with some ribbon, but we'll go through that later. So like before, just a few dabs of glue onto the feathers and just position it where you think it needs to go. I'm trying to get nice stripes here, but like I say, it didn't really matter because I didn't do full length crown covered in feathers, at least anyway. And then I just went ahead and used some sort of Petersham ribbon. So the ribbon I used here was the 38mm ribbon in plum from Petersham's, and I use this just to edge the brim. And it's so easy. The thicker ribbon is really good for the edges, by the way. I folded it over and just used my fingers to pinch it, using the heat from my fingers, and that just holds that into place. It just made it so much easier when it came to holding it into place to sew. I still needed to finish off the decoration of the hat, so that's what we're going to talk about next. Okay, so at this point I didn't have this, I just had the row of feathers here and the blank feathers at the bottom. So what I ended up doing was obviously adding some Petersham ribbon, which obviously is the same Petersham as that's going around here, and then I made a little ribbon. It's not necessarily a ribbon cockade as such. I'm just showing if you can get it on camera. It's not a ribbon cockade as such, but it's definitely something like a swirl of ribbons, and then just finished it off with some purple pearls that I had in my stash. And that was pretty much it. To do this, I literally just looped it one way, pinned it into place, sewed it down, and then just folded it over to replicate for the next side. This was a struggle. I don't do traditional hats as such, because it's not really my forte. I think with traditionalness it needs to be clean, and I like over the top. So I did struggle with this a lot, trying to make it traditional without. I get bored when I have to do traditional stuff. So I try to have an element of me, but I like how it turned out. I think I learned lessons from this. Make sure when you're covering your base, this one here, make sure you use enough interfacing to cover the sides as well. That's one thing that I didn't do, which means there was like a ridge going down from here to this section here, which was a little bit noticeable. I don't know if you can see on this side, it kind of goes in ever so slightly. So I mean, it's only ever so slightly, but it's something I did notice. And yeah, without further ado, let's send her to a photo shoot. Well, thank you very much for watching. I learned a lot making this hat. This is probably one of the most traditional ones I've made on this channel. And don't worry, I'm going to be back to my normal, outrageously fabulous stuff next week. Thank you very much for watching. All my social is listed in the description box below, as well as links to my Patreon as well. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.